Stephen, you explained at the beginning that this started out as a stage play.
Yeah.
Years ago. So it wasn't specifically based on any actual real life people like what's his name and that other one.
It was not. No. What's his name? And that other one had done nothing at that stage.
Yeah. What was the inspiration though? Did you
Simon D. No, there is. I once heard a story that I was describing in the vaguest terms because it involves no one that anyone has ever heard of, about a senior person who had committed some form of indiscretion, who was going to be interviewed, and they decided to give him a practice interview with one of his junior colleagues. And I heard this story and I just thought, wow, what a room to be in. Because any junior colleague is basically trying to knife their senior colleague. So what would that conversation be like? And that was the beginning of it, just that.
And has it changed much from, I mean, obviously it has changed a lot from the stage, that stage play version to this?
It's not massively different. No, it's the same story. There are more characters in this version. And there's certain things are extended, but it follows the same beats, and many of the scenes are quite similar.
And Karen, he sent you this script for when it was a stage play, just as a friend, like not saying you should be in this or anything. No. And then what did you make of it at that point? And then what did you make of it when he turned around and said, "Can you come and be in the show?"
I'd heard that he'd written a play, and I think I asked you if I could read it.
That's right, yes, and no one has ever asked me that before.
I was like, really? Okay. And so I read it. And I was just like, and this was actually before The Morning Show had come out, films like Bombshell. And I just sort of felt like so strongly that this story needed to be told. And I sort of felt it should be on screen, actually. And so I think I badgered Steven to turn it into a film for quite some time. And then later he was like, actually turning it into a TV show. And do you want to play Madeline? And I was like, couldn't believe it. I actually wasn't even gunning for the role. So I was totally honored when he asked me, and slightly terrified because it is such a challenge for me. But no, so excited.
It is a huge challenge because in these first 2 episodes, I think she's fairly inscrutable, isn't she? And she's kind of, and we see her being manipulating and all of that, but without spoiling anything, in the last 2 episodes, we see a completely different side to her. So was that the bigger challenge for you? Which was the biggest challenge of the whole of the role, if you like?
I think she's quite hard to read at this point. We don't quite know if we like her. She's got Douglas wrapped around her finger. But then in episodes 3 and 4, you're just going to see a completely different side to her. You're going to see everything that she's gone through in order to even get that position, the job interview from hell, and just so many awful things that she's had to deal with in the workplace, including abuse of power. And so that's where it definitely got more challenging. It is challenging for me to be a calculated, sassy person that does that, but the other stuff is more challenging.
Bit of a stretch, is it?
Well, Hugh, you described Douglas as a cousin of a character like Ian Fletcher from 2012 and W1A, but in what way is he different to Ian?
Well, I suppose Ian is surrounded by buffoons, whereas I think Ian Fletcher is surrounded by buffoons, whereas I think Douglas Bellowes is surrounded by really, top flight professionals. He's very confident at the beginning in the knowledge that he is at the top of that tree himself. And as I said before, he's also down with the new generation. He's got a Filofax, he feels in touch. And little does he know that his protege, and we discover more about that protege relationship in the next episodes, that he's very proud to have brought on this young talent. Little does he know that behind him is a fighter jet, not a biplane, and she's far more savvy and able to navigate the new media landscape than he is. So his smugness, or rather his comfort zone, is completely invaded, and as we see, he's just not in touch.
And you must have been on loads of shows like the show that's depicted in this program, and news kind of magazine shows. That being, I mean, you're on the one show only yesterday.
Yes.
So do you feel you had that kind of insight into what it's like, what they're like, those kind of shows anyway, and what the presenters are like?
Yes, I mean, to be honest, we catch a couple of glimpses of what it's like on the sofa, but we've been on enough of those to know that the front of the sofa looks great, and back here is all plywood. It's and that's true in all parts of the media. Let's face it.
Steve, apart as well as the kind of the idea of cancel culture, this show has loads of different themes bubbling. I mean, you have the fact that you have a tabloid newspaper editor as Douglas's wife, gives you a chance to look at that whole world of tabloid journalism, fame, I guess, and as in the final 2 episodes that I alluded to, it takes a whole different turn. Was that all in the original play, or did you add lots of layers of this as it went on?
No, that was all there. That was all there. People keep saying of this that it's very timely, and I just keep thinking it was timely 7 years ago. It would be timely 27 years ago. You could set this in ancient Rome. It's fine. I mean, with less technology, obviously, but the idea of it has always been around, yeah. And
I think I consider. I mean, even among your peers, you strike me as being a particularly fearless writer. Always.
Do I?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Absolute trembling coward.
Really? Did you have any fears about tackling this particular subject? Did you worry about being cancelled yourself?
Well, no, I do. Yeah, well, yes. I mean, yeah, as you know, if you by some clerical error become Doctor Who showrunner for a while and then simultaneously do Sherlock, there is a certain number of people who hate you endlessly for providing them with their favourite shows. So the attempts to cancel you, I mean, attempts. I wasn't cancelled, obviously. I mean, starting, it's largely Karen's fault.
Yeah.
Because the first attack was because I made Karen wear short skirts in Doctor Who, which I did not. Not on one occasion has Karen Gillan asked me what she should wear. Can you imagine that moment?
Stephen's very clever, but I don't take fashion advice from Steven.
That doesn't mean I don't offer it. I did actually say you'll be climbing up ladders and falling off monsters. Can you have some usable shots, please? But
to be fair, you actually did try to do that, and then you had to write in jokes to make sense of why
of your costumes.
was like that.
Yes. Why aren't you wearing hot
That's so
pants
funny,
in
because
Wales?
I was 21, and that's what 21-year-olds wear.
Okay.
But it's not. I mean, most of the kind of when you do an interview, we have a conversation afterwards, and it's kind of, what of that will I get into trouble for?
Yes,
It's
right.
like,
What the
what can
first
be
conversation?
turned around, taken out of context,
Yeah.
or just what?
Yeah.
Even panels at the BFI.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had a whole day of doing
Yeah.
this, and I've got a vague sense memory of having said some really awful things. On the other day on the radio, I came out with nailing some sense into Jesus. On today, I thought, as that came out my mouth, I thought, and it's only 2 minutes after I mentioned Gary Glitter. What am I doing?
So we picked those two correctly.
Yeah.
Didn't we?
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah. See,
Good that I mentioned it again.
Sue, at what point did it become a TV show? So you must have read the original play, presumably, and
Yeah.
then did you think Karen said it should be a film? At what point did you think actually this could be a TV show and make it for ITV?
I think after we couldn't sell it as a play or a film.
Yeah.
Right.
It was glove puppets next.
Yeah. And it changed names as well.
Yes, it
Yeah,
was. Yeah.
it was-
What was the original name?
It was.
It was Madeline Crow, then it was
It was
the
a tweet.
tweet, and then cancelling became popular, and I'm a slut. So I just went, let's get cancelled in there.
But it was. I mean, it was such a good idea, and it was such a good script. It was just finding the right medium for it. I think,
Yeah.
which I think this.
And it really works in the 4 episodes. I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
the best format I've ever seen the story in.
I think it probably is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think stopping on a cliffhanger is good for it. Just in the end, I mean, it was my whole idea was to do something different. So what I did was another TV show with Karen Gillan and Ben Mills in it. I mean,
Was the whole thing just an excuse to have a Doctor Who and/or coupling reunion?
yeah. Well, what's wrong with that?
Nothing. Yeah, absolutely.
Sarah Alexander was in The Unfriend when we were filming this. So it was lovely.
Yeah. Hugh's been
I
in
don't
episode.
like making new friends.
No, of course.
I like old ones.
Hugh, you've been in Doctor Who as well. You were in.
Yes, I was a piratical pirate in one episode with Matt and Karen. So we have previous.
The whole thing is a massive reunion. But Sue, the show also has. It's a shame that we can't show all 4 episodes. I think.
I agree. Do you want to see him?
Yeah, it forced everyone to sit through the whole thing because it does take a turn, doesn't it? Without spoiling anything, and I felt it's quite a radical structure as well. That the 3rd episode is kind of like a 1-to-1 without necessarily giving away
Yes.
who's a 1-to-1 with.
One big long scene.
Yeah.
I think.
So how did that strike you when you read that, and how was that to kind of turn into TV?
Well, I mean, obviously, because I'd seen the play, so I knew it. But I think what's quite interesting is all the conversations are about cancellation. And actually, obviously, once it starts moving into 3 and 4, it's not just about cancellation. It's about everything else. There's more Me Too, and there's microbullying, and and you realise that Madeline's why she's the way she is. It's really quite complex, but you'll just have to wait to see 3 and 4. Yeah. But it's a journey, so it's quite a progressive journey, isn't it? It's not just
completely, yeah.
The same, yeah.
Ben, as the director, I mean, for you, what was that like? Because 1 and 2, you're director. It's almost like farcical at points. It's very funny all the way through, loads of amazing gags, etc. Then you have to do 3 and 4, which are much more, I would say, dramatic and intense and almost like a thriller.
Yeah, you'd be right in saying that. They definitely are. they when Steven Sue sent me 1 and 2, that it's a real page turner, and it's got that propulsion, that energy, and that farcical thing. And episode 2, it then just becomes almost pure farce at the end, where there's different people coming in from different doors with even worse information. So you just sort of lean into that. And then, I got the first 2 scripts and thought, this is brilliant. I loved Douglas and loved the sort of inept firefighting from producer Toby and from Bentley and all of that. And you sort of go, I'm aligning with those guys. This is great. I don't know what Madeline's game is, but I want to know what Madeline's game is. And then when Steven Sue sent me 3 and 4, I'm going, oh my God, what's happened now? Like, where have the jokes gone, first of all? But then it goes into like Sue was saying, it just goes into a much more complicated and interesting space. And it questions what you found funny, or that's certainly how I reacted. I started questioning what I found funny and the characters that I had aligned with, and I think that's what was really interesting about it. So then when we spent time talking about 3 and 4, there's so much ambiguity and misdirection and characters saying one thing but meaning another, and where the audience are in that. It's a real maze. Steven's like fabulous writing, so we spent a lot of time in rehearsal sort of working all that out and all the little power shifts in those. So 3 and 4 are really, really exciting.
Well, yeah, we had the luxury of rehearsal, which doesn't often happen in television. I think we did manage to rehearse every single scene properly. So at least we knew the landscape once you start getting into the world of chopping it up into non-sequential bits. But I have to say, Ben's input shouldn't be underestimated, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, that his sense of tone, of how to play with farce and comedy. I had the pleasure of working with him on a show with Noel Fielding previously about Dick Turpin, which was a sort of whimsical farce in a sense. And so he has these great comedic skills, but to drill down, to allow you to play the high comedy, if you like, and then to find actually the sort of grittier, more essentially dramatic tones of the later episodes is a great skill in a director. And he was ruthless and relentless and wouldn't let anything go, would he?
Absolutely, but that was what was so amazing. He's absolutely obsessive. In the best way. I've never met anyone.
She means
like
that in a nice
Seems
way.
easygoing, but
Anyway. No, but it made me feel like I didn't need to be obsessive, because I'm like, oh, we're in safe hands here. He's going to have us do this 72 times until he gets where he wants. But I love that. It was a crash course in acting.
Oh, so lots of takes, like you're the David Fincher or Stanley Kubrick of...
But it's one of those with this. I'll take that. But there's a lot in this where there's lots of different reads. So both Karen and Hugh have got really strong, and our whole cast have got really strong comedic instincts. So it's a line that you can go. Hugh won't mind me saying, we'll want to find the joke and want to skewer that laugh and find where it is. And then sometimes you want to try that, and then other times you want to. There's all that little micro plays and recalibrations that are really fun to do.
I love that though.
But there were also beats, and particularly that last episode there, where, without giving stuff away, there are clues laid about what's coming up, which you just grabbed off the end of takes, and they weren't there in the script saying cut to or look from or a angle on this. It was just really beautifully drawn from the material that was there and laid the seeds. This is why post-production is so fascinating, I think. I've never been in an edit properly, but to see the way that you've woven stuff in that wasn't obvious on the page just shows another level of production, which is great.
It feels like the editing is super, super important because, as Hugh says, every little nuance, every little facial expression is so key, isn't it, particularly in those first 2 episodes?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a lot. I mean, Mark and Simon, our brilliant editors, are just as obsessive with all of that. And there's multiple takes. There's so much material to sift through, but you get to a point where like all those little micro reactions, the guys are so embedded in those characters because you're committing to, like, episode 3 is essentially one scene that we shot over 6 days, and it's ostensibly Karen and Ben in one room for pretty much the whole episode, and various characters coming in. So it's a really intense sort of working environment, and you're sort of and slicing that up into manageable chunks for an entire day. So there's a lot of takes, but Mark and Simon are brilliant at sort of sifting through all of that, and you can then twist it and play with the tone how you want to.
Karen, is this the most amount of dialogue you ever had to learn for a show? I mean, there's an incredible amount, particularly in 3 and 4, as I keep saying.
Oh, it's got to be up there, especially in 4. I think I'm talking for long Moffat-style chunks, which is the best, but it takes a long time to learn. I think I did one film where it might have had more dialogue, a horror film called Oculus, where I had to explain the history of a mirror for 10 minutes straight, and it was dates and names. Yeah. So much harder to memorize than like an emotional thing where you can sort of navigate your way through it. This was just like memorizing facts. So that was the hardest. This was the second hardest. I had to start weeks in advance before I even came to London to start working on this. I was already trying to like learn everything, so because I knew I just couldn't do it the night before on this.
And I know you've said your character isn't based on any specific example of a TV presenter who's working with a man 20 years older, but there are many examples of that. But did you take inspiration from any real life equivalents of the character?
I did watch the Prince Andrew interview.
With Emily Maitlis?
Yeah, that's why I had a pen. She pulled a pen. Pretty important.
Yes, you click that pen very
I did have
notably.
a little fun with the pen, you know. Yep. And then, you haven't seen that yet, it's in episode 4. And I'm also just a fan of Susanna Reid. I think she's really good at her job. Right. I don't know if I've based it on her or I just want to talk about Susanna right now, but she's great.
She's brilliant, yeah. She has that, kind of like she's in charge kind of.
She's really in charge. She's always a step of everybody else on the show. I'm like, when are they going to, catch up to her? Sorry, that's quite mean. But she's just brilliant. Yeah.
And so even though it's clear that we didn't have specific people in mind, the casting in this is key, isn't it? So presumably, who was first? In terms was Hugh? I mean, it's important to have someone like Hugh play a famous, beloved, national treasure type figure.
Well, Karen was first because of the play.
Yes.
And then and Sarah Crowe, who's out there somewhere, I can't see her, a lovely casting director. And we just all had a lovely time together, didn't we? When you'd just been working with Hugh. Mm-hmm. It just sort of fell together really beautifully.
It was Hugh your idea, Ben. Yeah. Is that right? It's Hugh Ben's idea, in fact.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, I'd read 1 and 2 and absolutely loved it, and then I just kept picturing Hugh because someone wringing the funnies out of that situation. Well, just for those first 2 episodes where you get to, I thought I couldn't picture anyone else who would be able to do it as well as him. And luckily he liked the script and wanted to come on board.
And then it just took a while to sort of align everybody in dates with you and and Karen. It was lovely. Yeah.
And Stephen, I mean, the characters, the supporting cast is incredible, but Simon Russell Beale, I have to mention, as the world's worst agent, is that based on? Have you had that experience? And how funny is he? Just
My
watching
agent's
him?
in the room, for God's sake.
She won't drop you, darling. She won't drop you.
I was more inspired and amazed by the extraordinary valiant example of most American agents.
Yes.
Who are like bodyguards, who are programmed to shoot you in the back at the slightest sign of trouble. I mean, that's just what they do. That's the first person, when someone gets in trouble in America, the first person to betray them utterly.
We don't rep them.
Is the agent. Snivelling rats. Yeah. So I thought that was a fun thing to play on. Yeah. And you know how people like that make grand pronouncements about their morality. We at this agency have always held. No, you haven't. You've represented people on television. You haven't gone around thinking we must make the world a better place. You haven't thought that for 1 second of your life. And in fairness, neither have I. I'm just not claiming it.
Hugh, how was it doing those scenes with Simon Russell? I mean, it's so funny. Did you have to keep a straight face?
Completely. I mean, he's such he's a legend, and I remember actually in the rehearsal, do you remember, he said, let's not go down the route of the sort of overfed, sort of food-grabbing gourmand. Why did we make him vegan and he drinks water? And he did it for about, we tried it out for about, half an hour, and he went, no, it doesn't work.
Dug into a chip.
Yeah. And Nick Mohammed's character, I think, is hilarious as well. The idea of this comedy writer who's the most unfunny person. is that again?
Fairly normal.
Have you met such people?
I think there's a kind of comedy writer. I sort of think that Morgan is like, where they think that they are actually a tool of social justice, that they're going to redeem the world through humour. You really aren't.
No.
You really actually not how a joke works. And he's just blithering in that way. And I think there's just something fundamentally funny about someone who thinks they're funny and isn't. And everyone's looking at me. Why?
Sue, when you were when the script was finished for this TV version, did you have conversations with Steven about it? From the point of view of how, as he mentioned in the introduction, you do sleep together. So any of the kind of sexual politics and all of that, did you discuss, or did you think it was all there in the script?
Was there? I think we had a bit of a conversation about feminism.
Yes, you and Karen and were talking exactly how feminist is Madeline, and because at one point she was saying, "I don't really care," and you were saying, "No, not quite. That's not quite right." But it also wasn't right. The thing that Madeline mostly resists is anyone categorizing her. Mm. You're a woman, therefore you're a feminist. You're young, therefore you must vote Labour. All that stuff. She just says, no, don't you make assumptions about me. But as Sue and Karen pointed out, of course she is a feminist, but she doesn't like the automatic assumption. So it was sort of picking my way through the lines on that, where I found quite difficult. But I think those sequences, which you'll see in episode 3, God, what you must be thinking about episode 3. You must be thinking there are aliens in it or something. There are. It's really exciting. I think that worked well. But yeah, that was a tricky one. Yeah.
Karen and Hugh, having tasted what it must be like to some extent to be a TV presenter, this kind of show, do you think you could do it in real life? Do you underestimate the skill involved?
I could definitely never do that for a living. Live television.
No, absolutely. I mean, having been on enough sofas where you see the auto cue working, and see people, you think, well, that's fairly straightforward. And then I can never forget, when Claire Balding's auto cue stopped for probably 25 minutes during something important, like if not the Olympics, then something else. And she just managed to keep talking. I would dry up and just stare.
Pretend to be frozen. Oh, it's my idea of a nightmare.
It's a great skill.
Yeah. Why is it a nightmare?
Because I have a fear of reading things out loud in front of people, which is
good
really
choice
weird.
of profession, then.
I don't know why I've done this to myself, but when I'm acting and there's an emotion involved, the fear goes away, or I can channel it into something. But just like a straight read in front of people with no emotion, that's my greatest phobia. So that's why this role was quite scary.
There's a flashback scene as well coming up, we should say, where we learn a bit more about your background. We see a different kind of version of you, of the character, Madeline. How was that to play?
That was great. I was so happy to show a different version of her. You start to understand her more and see her as this kind of less polished version, and she's a bit clumsy and nervous, and I just thought that was really nice to see a more vulnerable side of her.
What's so special? This is an embarrassing question because he's sitting over there. What is so special about Steven's writing?
Oh, just get in there, darling.
Yeah.
Where do I even begin? I mean, I really like writers who have like a sense of showmanship to their writing. So I really like, that's why I like Steven Moffat. That's why I like Aaron Sorkin. Like people who have like a real flair and you can hear their voice even through the characters. I really enjoy that. And his lines are just so fun to deliver. I mean, he gives you some right zingers, and I just have so much fun delivering them. And also, I feel like I trained in his style because it was my first big job. So it's really familiar to me, all of the rhythms.
And Hugh, what do you think?
Well, I think that
I'm going to go look down the line. Everyone has
including Steve.
I'm looking my go. My go's going to be awesome.
Well, for me, it's the surprising turns. The fact that your emotions, even in these first 2 episodes, you question them as you're going along, but the twists and turns, and as it gets as you go further on, it gets darker and darker. I mean, I've never been as a read-through like it. I remember talking to Ian, who's here, anyway, after the read-through, which was full of explosive laughter. And by the end, I literally wanted to wash my hands. I felt so grubby because it does turn nasty. And as with great satire, and this is, I think, is a fine satire, the laughter catches in your throat, and then the punch has gone in, and the knife turns, and you start to question your own thoughts about your values, and you put yourself in the shoes of the characters. Would I have done that? How would I have fared in that situation? What is right? What is wrong? And so, but you've been drawn in by such skillful writing. What I love, and this again goes back to Ben's direction, is that it whizzes past. That you don't go badum tish. The jokes are there, but they just fly past, and it's up to you to be smart to catch them. That's great direction, and that's great writing.
Ben, there have been loads of brilliant kind of TV shows and films set in this kind of world, broadcast news and morning show that come in. Did you take any inspiration from any of those, or did you have your own vision of kind of?
No, reference those because it's just to familiarise with the world, but more, I suppose, the two references that I talked to Steven and Sue about initially were The Big Short, Karen was in, and Uncut Gems. So 2 film references, what they had sort of that, they had a propulsion to them, and they had a tension to them, and they had the feeling of a character under a microscope, and that was the feel that we wanted to give, and that scrutiny is on Douglas in particular in the first 2 episodes, and then when you see 3 that we keep talking about, that attention is then focused on Madeline and shows you a side she didn't see. So all of that, the feeling of the camera closing in and that sort of world, those 2 film references were sort of what I wanted to bring to it.
Because Uncut Gems is incredibly intense, isn't it? It kind of builds up. Yeah.
Yes, and I think it's that tension. It's that sort of. I think it gives you a feeling of then when you're that. It puts you in the shoes of that character, and the background all just disappears. You're scrutinising that character. You're seeing every sort of micro beat and moment. Like even just watching episode 1 again, the scene where Hugh's around the breakfast bar with Alex, giving you that feeling of the explosion of that tweet, and it's all off. Like the resting state of the show is, and it just goes up like that because once the mention of the tweet, when Ben character mentions the tweet, we're off. But just that feeling of them being around that breakfast bar, going that first night of going, what are we going to do now? Like how can we contain this? And I think that was the first rhythm, and then you just accelerate through it.
Yeah. I'm going to throw it into the audience in a sec. Just finally, Steven, you deal with you satirise so many ideas, and it feels like a kind of state of the nation thing going on. Do you have specific things you think audiences will take away from it? Is there something that a kind of a particular area that you've analysed you want people to think about?
I don't think you ever know what that is. I mean, it's not the job of a writer to tell people what to think. I think sometimes when you're writing, you find out what you think, but you shouldn't ever be trying to give a grand message. I mean, because grand messages are useless from people like me. I don't know how to get home unless someone books me a driver. I can't lead you to utopia. I have no ideas.
But you might not recognise that.
I think a bit of it though is about people jump to conclusions.
I mean, but these are things that I think everybody knows.
We're about to argue now.
Yeah, but I don't think these things are new to anyone.
No,
because I mean, when Sheila says nobody reads the article, that's me. I don't read the article. I read the headline, and then have an angry opinion about it. Always. I mean, and I've got no intention of stopping. So I don't think people are going to be informed by my work because it hasn't worked on me. But you know what I mean? We all do that.
Yes.
I mean, and in fairness to the entire human race, we haven't got much time, right? We're not going to learn the ins and outs of every moral debate that's going on. We just reach for, I'm sort of centre left. What do we say about that? Okay, we say that, fine, and pretend that we think that. I think that is interesting, and it's farcical, and it's human. I'm mostly interested because I think it's broadly true that about the amount of interlocking bullying in any bunch of people. I mean, subtle, but not the obvious kind of bullying, which I'm going to beat you up later. But there's also, I mean, the scene with Sheila and her mad secretary, her mad PA. Who's getting bullied there? Sheila. Absolutely. That's a kind of bullying. Everybody, and Sheila gets bullied quite a lot, and then she bullies the entire nation in retaliation. I find that was the thing I was most keen to write about. But what grand conclusion I have reached, I don't know. There's a guy driving a car and he makes a gag. Yay.
Perfect.
Well, that second question, I'm gonna fling over to Ben. The first one is a good question, by the way. They're both good questions, but that one is interesting. Is how funny can you go? It's not a sitcom, and I've got a tremendous sitcom twitch. I think, oh, there hasn't been a joke for half a page. What am I going to do? And it's very difficult. Especially if you're inclined that way. You're inclined towards one-liners and so on. You think, is that line just too clever for that person to have thought of in that moment? Now, it might not be too clever for Sherlock Holmes or Doctor Who, but for an ordinary bloke, is he actually going to have enough time to think of that line and you sort of moderate it or pull it back or phrase it slightly wrongly? You do have, if you're going to keep it in the real world, you have to not put a mute on it, but you have to write in a slightly different way. You're completely correct. And I'm not always very good at it. I have screwed up quite often in that. I've screwed up in many ways throughout a long, tedious career. I apologize for all of it. Ben, would you explain everything about filming in studios?
Very quickly, yeah. There's not that much actually we used a real studio that had like a gallery. So in that episode 1 where you're seeing the producer and Toby and Douglas discussing, that's all in a real studio. But then most of episode 2 is all in a production office. We went to Sky News, BBC News, ITV, and had a look at their production offices, because most of our show is less about what happens on the shiny floor and the sofa, but more what happens in the grubby corners and the corridors and the offices. And when you go to those places, they're incredibly underwhelming and they're really drab. You go, oh God, I mean, we're going to have to make it look like this so it feels real. So that's great that you felt that, but we're also going to make it feel a little bit more exciting. So we had an amazing production designer and team, Dick Lunn, who sort of then took over an entire office. If you went to that office where you've just seen episode 2, it's a barren white shell of a building. It was like a call centre, and then he and his amazing team made it look bigger and better than Sky or BBC News. But it's great to be in a real environment for something like that, because you're chasing the characters around. Sheila and Douglas's house is a real house, and we rehearsed in the real house as well. Just, you want that familiarity of when they're moving around and they know where everything is, and the cameras can dance around with them, and it hopefully it feels more realistic as a result. I can do the first one. Succession. I mean, yes, I would be lying if it wasn't a reference. I think that's an amazing example of a naturalistic, a beautiful naturalistic look. And it has, as Hugh was saying, scripts that are littered with jokes, but they are so confident throwing them away on the back of people's heads and not really focusing on them. So that as a style, and when I read Steven's scripts, there are that many jokes in them, and it feels like a world, a realistic world that we want to make beautiful, but also deal with jokes in that way. But from a music point of view, yes, I think, and as well, I think we lent into sort of the melodrama of the musical style that Succession has, and that orchestral style, which it became its sort of standpoint. And Mark and Simon, the editors, and I scored it with temp music to start with, and used a lot of that Succession score. And then we have David Arnold, you will have heard of him, who's a remarkable composer who then came onto it and then gave his new version. And a lot of it is then, as a director, you're having to divorce yourself from the music that you've lived with an edit, and then forge this new sort of sound with the composer. And he did a remarkable job of sort of them making it his own thing. There's a few that probably still feel a bit Succession-y, but I think we both we love the melodrama of that as a moment. Like when the tweet explodes and Toby says it's gone nuclear, rather than it becoming sort of tense and propulsion. There's like a mournful tragedy to it, which I think it sort of it feels like the floor opens up underneath you and you go, imagine if you got that call and how you would feel. And there's some of that melodrama I think is really effective in the music. There was 2 and 3.
Oh, what would the film
What
be
would
like?
what the film
Yeah.
have been like?
Yeah.
It would have been like the 4 episodes, but they wouldn't stop.
And we'd probably still be trying to make it.
Yeah, I would fear one of the things that puts me off is that I would just slightly worry is the kind of film you make and never gets released, because that's not cinema's no longer much of a home for that kind of drama. I mean, this is not me trashing superhero movies because I bloody love them, but I don't know that that's the home for that kind of story anymore.
I think in something like this, which one can observe its theatrical roots, i.e., long sustained scenes, and obviously the difference between the stage and a filmed version is on stage you have 2, 3, sometimes 4 or more weeks to rehearse, and for those memory traces, in my case, to embed very, very deeply. In film and TV, doing something like this, where you have got the same sustained periods, you don't have that luxury. Yes, we had a week of rehearsal, but you're making very quick decisions on the hoof, really, and getting the whole structure in your head before we start filming. I personally, as a slightly old dray horse, found the retention of big swathes of dialogue in a short space of time quite tough. This youngster, made it look like a piece of piss. But I do think that this was this weird balance between it being almost a theatrical piece, like 4 one-act plays almost. Certainly, acts 3 and 4 are with that rhythm that you would have in a sustained theatre piece, versus the compartmentalised version. Which is the day-to-day running of a TV show. So episodes 3 and 4 took probably 6 days each, didn't they? I think roughly. And certainly in episode 4, we arrived in the dark. We were filming it just before Christmas. Arrived in the dark, filmed in a black box, and went home in the dark. My vitamin D levels just collapsed.
Yeah, we'd spend a whole day on each person, so it'd be like a Hugh day, and everything was on you. And then the next day, it would be all about me, and so we would be like on for full days, and then we'd have a day off while we're doing the off-camera lines.
Yeah. So it was theatrical but televisual, and they have different demands on your sort of brain as an actor anyway. So what about as a writer?
I'm not sure it's as different as people make out. You tell the story and you obey the rules of the story. In this case, it was obviously a story that whatever your possibilities were, you would want long scenes. I just did a Doctor Who where Doctor Who stands on a landmine in a crater. It's far more theatrical than anything up there. It really is. Everything comes to him in that episode. So it's you obey the rules of the story. I'm more and more interested in long scenes. I think there's a great thing that Alan Ayckbourn wrote in his book about the crafty art of playwriting, which I strongly recommend. He says of television writing and movie writing, he says, he talks about the limitation that you can't intercut between different scenes, and he says, so what? The film and television cuts between multiple lines of action for no other reason than it can. There's nothing particularly fast or useful about it. Something like that, he says. He's absolutely right. Why did we do it? First noticed that when we were doing Sherlock. We used to do ridiculously long scenes. I mean, people didn't seem to notice, but I think His Last Vow, they go back to Baker Street in the first few minutes, and they're there for about 20 minutes in one flat. It's ridiculous. So, I don't think it's as different as people say it is.